Hello. I grew up on Morgan Hill, where this gentleman referred to. My folks sold out to Waste Management once they got surrounded. As a youth in the 60s, I remember drinking out of those natural springs in the woods. So I'm well aware of it. To this day, my father says he wishes he never heard the words Waste Management. My question is, when are you two young fellas going to come to Logansport for 6 months or a year and work with us through this to find the alternative sources?
Two young fellows.
Who are you talking about?
I didn't know who's involved.
I'll get to you soon.
I think one of the good things that could come out of this controversy that to a certain extent is has neighbors not necessarily agreeing, is that I would hope that the community can come together to, for example, figure out realistic way, for example, to help the jobs of the workers who are concerned about this. I think that's really important. And I talked to one of the heads of the union was there today too, and we chatted about that. And I thought it was positive. My work, I go from here. On Tuesday, I'll be in North Salt Lake City, Utah, where there's actually a medical waste incinerator that was just busted for excess dioxin emissions and falsifying emissions data, according to the state of Utah, yet they're allowed to keep operating. And that incinerator is a few feet from where kids live. So my work takes me a lot of places. What I can't commit to is continuing to review information, helping evaluate what's being said, and to the extent we can, again, we're a small nonprofit, but to the extent we can, help this community figure out which way forward on this issue and provide feedback on other things that we might have some knowledge about. But I would hope and know that communities do have, if you put your minds to it, the ability to work through kind of a crisis like this and try to make things better. And I think there's so much interest here, and I think there's some hope, and I wouldn't get distressed about it too much, but it's not going to be over tomorrow.
Well, I just want to make a statement that I do commend the city and its officials for trying to find some way to do something, and we appreciate the input from both sides on the pros and cons.
Yeah, and that was one of the first things I told the city council, is that I certainly don't blame them for looking at this at all, but they need to have scrutinized it a lot better than their consultants did. So I agree with you on that.
Yeah, I had a quick statement first of all, and then two questions. I think it appropriate that I identify myself. I'm Kerwin Olson, the Executive Director of the Citizens Action Coalition out of Indianapolis, Indiana. And first of all, I wanted to commit CAC to the extent we can to aid this group in your fight against this travesty. Secondly, there's more than hope. We've been involved in a biomass plant down in Milltown, a biomass plant down in Scottsburg, a gasification plant proposed for New Carlisle up in St. Joe's County. And those communities reached out to CAC and asked for our assistance in some way, shape, or form, and we assisted to the extent that we can. So all three of those projects appeared to be fait accomplis. Not one of those projects was built, and the citizens of those cities ran those folks out of town on a rail. So this is even a worse idea than those three were. So I think there's more than hope here. So stay positive and stay focused, and democracy always wins in the end. But I did have two questions. Number one, I heard somebody say something about fuel switching at the plant. So is this plant some sort of capable of being fuel switched to natural gas, or was that just a comment? And then secondly, I've heard a lot about tonnage per day with respect to the Chester, Pennsylvania plant and a few others, but what does that tonnage a day translate in terms of megawatt hour production? And what has the output been at some of those facilities?
Chester, Pennsylvania, which is the largest one in the U.S., is 3,400 tons per day and 90 megawatts. So if you essentially double that, or almost double it to 6,000 tons per day, then it will make sense that this plant could be in the range of 180 megawatts. But that's if they use conventional incinerator technology. I don't know how that would be different with this type of technology because no one's done it at this scale. So I can't say it's going to be on the same exact scale. It might be somewhat different. But there was some talk about fuel switching. They kept talking about flip the switch and you can just put natural gas in it. And the second stage of this process where you have basically a combustion turbine that is similar to what they would just use for natural gas, they could run a natural gas line in there and use it for that. But like I said, it would make very little sense economically to do that because then you're switching from getting paid to take your fuel to paying for your fuel, and the economics go into the toilet pretty quickly if you've already invested so much money to have the sorts of pollution controls and other equipment you need to have a pyrolysis plant of this scale. Paying that off is not going to happen if you're burning natural gas most of the time.
And real quick, one of the other issues, I had visited a few years ago a gigantic gasification plant, not using pyrolysis, but gasification, in other words, heating the garbage, burning the gases in Japan, in Nagoriyama Prefecture, a company called Ibara, and there's a bunch of these in Japan. And they claimed, and I got, my Japanese colleagues got me, they had a company had an English language brochure, fortunately, so I could actually read it. And it made claims like no emissions, but a big part was how much was waste energy plant. And they claimed nothing, no outside fuel was used, and that they generated X amount of electricity at the end. And almost immediately, and thank goodness I had a really good technical and really proficient translator, and we were able to document that and get the company to admit during our tour that actually their claims of how much was generated was false, and that they poured vast amounts of kerosene in to stoke the flame, and they imported electricity off the grid. Now, that's not Pyrolyzer, but it's one of the giant gasification facilities in the world. So even when they talk about we can generate X amount of electricity, not only generally hasn't that happened with pyrolysis, but even with other bigger gasification plants from established companies, you have to look at their claims with a grain of salt. By the end of that tour in Japan, the 3 plant managers sat in front of us and bowed their heads repeatedly and apologized for the lies of the company. Yet the people in Japan were and continue to be misled. And so we really look at these claims with a lot of scrutiny and just keep at the questions you're asking are great, and keep asking those questions, and you're going to find the answers are very interesting. And I think they will, if you're certainly, I think it will lead to, at a minimum, skepticism, if not outright opposition to what's being proposed here, because I don't think it's what's in their proposal. I don't think they could do it. And there's so many questions unanswered.
Last question for the evening. This one is for Jim. Is there any connection between the consultants and Pyrolyzer? And the other part of it is, can we sue those consultants for not doing the job they were paid to do?
No, because the people that have been elected are in charge of how our tax money is being spent, and that's the exercise of power, and you can't sue somebody because you vote them into office and then you decide you don't like them later. There's no legal theory that would be the basis of a lawsuit. That was the second part of your question. The first part of your question about is there a connection between Pyrolyzer, the company, and the consultants? Time will tell. This is the finale, okay, guys? The way that you're supposed to be able to get money, this is all about money, that's the point. The way that you're supposed to be able to get information as a citizen out of your public government is just by asking a request for information. And we've got a state version of that. I have written at least 6 requests going back to last fall, and I have gotten 0 answer from both the mayor, Mr. Franklin, and from the LMU superintendent, Mr. Hartman. if you're going to do a lawsuit, you have to go through this procedure where you ask the question, it has to be specific, it has to be the kind of thing that you're entitled to, and then they answer you. And then you run this, my request and their denial, through the public access counselor. So for example, I said, well, the only person at the local government level who has the authority to negotiate is the city council. Therefore, between January the 1st, when Mr. Franklin became the mayor, and November of 2012, when the actual request for proposals went out, which is the beginning of the official negotiation process under the public-private agreement law. So right there, within that time period, before there was a true reason for confidentiality in negotiation, in that, January to November, did the mayor, who did he negotiate with? Did he negotiate with Franklin, what's his name, Canterbury? Did he negotiate with the guy that came up with the squeezing of the pellets down? Did he negotiate with, there's another company called Green something or other? And what's been going on with the favorite of LMU is Crow Horwath, a guy named John Scomp. So I ask all these questions. And the answer from the state guy was, the State Access Commission guy was, well, for sure Ted Franklin had no authority to negotiate as mayor. Paul Hartman, as LMU superintendent, had no negotiation authority. But how do you know the city council didn't give authority? So I asked that question. And the answer is this long, and it's just like, throw the kitchen sink in, all the excuses in the world. So that one's pending. So I've been asking those questions, and I have gotten zero answer. But I bet you a nickel I'll get it eventually, even if it takes a lot of work. So my beautiful wife just went like this. You know what that means? It doesn't mean it's supper time. We want to thank you all. This is a great gathering. It's an exercise of democracy at the local level. As the expert, Mr. Morton Marcus, says, please put your name on the sign-up sheet. We're going to do everything we can to continue the direction that we're already in. And please note, we're not name-calling. Keep staying at the high level of asking questions, be factual, and in the end, the truth will be known, and there won't be no Pyrolyzer. It'll be $1.5 million loss, but we'll keep track of that. Thank you all.